A warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining this historic event, the launch of Change, the City Hub and Network for Gender Equity. I am Inga Beale. I sit on the Mayor of London's Business Advisory Board, and I'm very proud to be the moderator today. Now, this launch couldn't come at a more relevant time in our lives. As the world reels from the COVID-19 pandemic, this initiative aims to address gender inequalities, which, despite efforts over many years, we still have in abundance. Gender equity is a very worthy aim, particularly as the situation has been made worse by the pandemic. There has been a huge surge in violence against women and girls, an unprecedented increase in unpaid care work, which is predominantly carried out by women, and a large-scale loss of jobs that will affect globally 5% more women than men. Now, Change's overarching objective is to achieve systemic change, so there is true gender equity in our cities. The founding members will compare practices in their own cities, assess what works and what's available to share to really create change. Now, we're joined today by some inspirational leaders who come from right across the world, Asia to Africa to Europe to the Americas. And this is part of what makes this such an exciting initiative. The world is joining together and collaborating against a backdrop of increasing nationalism and protectionism, and collaborating on a very important topic. Now, the following are all co-chairs of Change, and I'm so pleased to be welcoming them all to today's launch. It's the Mayor of Barcelona, Ada Colau, the Mayor of Freetown, Yvonne Arquisauya, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. We're hoping to be joined by Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, Chief of Government of Mexico City. And we're being joined virtually by the Governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike, who has, because of time differences, pre-recorded a video for us. Now, to kick things off, we will hear live from the principal founding member of Change and chair of this whole initiative, someone who not only takes gender equity very seriously, but all matters of sustainability, and leads the US Mayor's National Climate Action Agenda. I am very pleased to hand over to Mayor Eric Garcetti, Mayor of Los Angeles. Over to you, Mayor Garcetti.
Well, thank you so much, Inga, and thank you for being such a great moderator. And thank you to my brother and sister mayors who are part of this moment in history. I couldn't be with a greater group of co-chairs, a group of people that are smart, good, and effective. And it's rare if you can get 2 out of 3 of those in a person. These are all stars with all 3 of them. So thank you to Mayor Colau, to Mayor Arquisauya, Mayor Khan, Governor Koike, and Jefa de Gobierno, Sheinbaum. 5 continents, 6 mayors, an extraordinary demonstration of what this moment is about, and that even in the worst crises of our lives, that we have to take these as moments of reimagining, not just of restoration and rebuilding. And so we came together a little bit over a year ago to announce our plans to create the first international gender equity network, what is now called City Hub and Network for Gender Equity, or Change. And we did this in the recognition of 2 very powerful truths. First, that our work to achieve gender equity is far from complete. And second, that local governments can and should lead. That, in fact, cities are those laboratories of policy. They are the welcoming places where all human beings belong. And a sense of those values, together with that value of action, makes gender equity find a home in a global network that rests in local governments. We know how to collaborate as mayors. We know how to tackle our common challenges and take collective action. And many of us know each other from those networks like C40 Cities, based in Mayor Khan's city, which is combating climate change, and in my opinion, the most effective organization actually implementing climate change action. Or the Mayor's Migration Council that many of us are active, a group that's focused on addressing issues related to migration worldwide that cities often bear the opportunities and the burdens from. I'm very proud to be the first chair of this network, and I hope one of you is already making your plans to succeed me, because this isn't about any one of us. This is all about what we can do collectively and expand this network to really materially improve the conditions of girls and women around the world. And for men and boys who are involved, we're not doing this because we know women. We're doing this for ourselves as well, because gender equity is something that serves every human being when we can achieve wherever we live, wherever we work, wherever we study. We can't leave anybody on the sidelines, and we can't afford to have human rights abuses in our midst. And so I want to thank some very special people who made this historic day possible. Change's special advisor and my friend, Sakiko Yamada, who has been such a valuable partner to Change as we look to expand and giving the resources necessary to do that. I want to give a very special shout out to really the architect of this, my Deputy Mayor for International Relations, Ambassador Nina Hachigian, and her team who have taken this from vision to reality. And my partner and the best part of my day, Los Angeles' First Lady, Amy Elaine Wakeland, who I met actually in Britain when we were both studying there, who together with my Chief Innovation Officer, Amanda Daflos, and her team has led the gender equity work in Los Angeles that we hope inspires folks around the country and the world as we are inspired by you. In Los Angeles, we've tried to desegregate gender. In other words, not make it an issue area for some specialists, but instead make it a prism through which every leader and every employee in Los Angeles refracts the work that they do. We made it an imperative for every city department through an executive directive that whether you were the fire chief or the city librarian, that you needed to have gender action plans, measure what we are doing, and show progress. And in a few short years, we've seen huge metrics that have improved, whether it's gender parity. In fact, more women than men now serve to lead our boards and commissions, over about 200 citizen volunteers, to record number of women who are breaking new ground in positions of power that traditionally women haven't been a part of, whether it's running an airport, or whether it's running our system of transportation, or whether it's looking at public works departments. We are sharing what we've learned and passing that on. We looked at the number of girls who were playing sports in our city's recreation facilities and found out there was just 25% of all the children. And we've expanded that to nearly 50% already. It's at 47% in just a couple of years without taking a spot away from a boy, but just being conscious with an initiative called Girls Play LA. We have to act with urgency. At its worst, women and girls are dying. Less than that, but just as severe, the lives that they do have are often underpaid, overlooked. They're the subjects and victims of violence. They survive disproportionately lower pay, more violence, as I mentioned, and also fewer opportunities, especially in promotion and in wealth building. We must act with urgency because a recent World Economic Forum reports that if we stay on our current course, the economic gender gap will close, but in 257 years. That's the pace that we are on right now. And we know, as you mentioned in the introduction, Inga, that the disproportionate impact of the pandemic has been on women. Here in the United States, 1.1 million workers dropped out of the workforce just in September. 80% of them were women. 80% of them women. So we can't allow this pandemic to set us back further. And as a network, we're going to show the world what we can do when we act together to act for equality, how our economies grow, how our cities become safer, how our communities are stronger, how our children and families become more resilient. And so let me turn it over to a first co-founder and a great mayor from the city that my wife and I got engaged in, the great city of Barcelona, Mayor Ada Colau. The floor is yours.
Tienes la palabra. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Eric Garcetti. Thank you, everyone. It's an honor and it's a great pleasure to be here today sharing this project, which is so necessary and so exciting. I could start a little autobiographically. I made my way to the Barcelona City Hall in 2015. I was the first female mayor in the history of Barcelona, which is a bit surprising because Barcelona historically has had an identity as an open, as a cosmopolitan city, democratic city, a modern city, which has been groundbreaking, which has been the stage of many social fights and social struggles throughout its history. And yet, in such a modern city and so open, well, it turns out I was the first female mayor, which is already an indicator that we do have a formal equality because thanks to the struggle of many women who came before us, our mothers, our grandmothers, we have conquered on many countries a formal equality, legal equality, but we still have a long way to go to make the cultural shift that we really need. And I also realized how important it was to be the first female mayor when I was walking down the street, and it's happened quite a few times that little girls will come to say hi and say, "Hey, I want to be the mayor too." It's then that we realize how important it is to reach every decision making spot, not just for ourselves, but for the girls who will be the leaders of tomorrow. Also, the most important thing in the fact that I came to be the first female mayor, it's not just a Barcelona anecdote, it's also representative of the situation worldwide. Because if I remember correctly, it's not under 20% of cities have a female mayor. So it is city halls and city councils which are still very far away from being gender balanced, but we're making progress. And when women do get to reach power, the idea is that they have to get there to transform it, not to keep things as they were, but to feminize politics and improve it for the benefit of women and men. I always say I'm the mother of two boys, and I want my boys to live in a world that is more feminist, less violent, more respectful, more equal, so they can be happier too. With that in mind, the idea that feminism is a matter of justice for women, but also an aspiration of a better world for everyone, for both women and men, our government, not just myself as the first female mayor, but our government stands as a feminist government. So we created a whole directorate, a whole section of our government about feminism and LGBTQ policies, because we believe that it's not just important to make these matters visible, but it's also of the utmost importance to teach the message that this is the main axis in our public policies, which means we don't just make specific feminist policies, but to ourselves, feminism is one of our main avenues, which must drive all our public policies. Which is why one of the most important things that I believe we've done in our years at the Barcelona City Hall is precisely this department of feminism cross-sectionality, so that feminist policies reach every aspect of the city government. From budget, very important, because obviously you can't make public policy without money, so budgets must be made with a feminist perspective. Also fiscal policy, urban planning, because it's very important how we design the city, with what priorities, and to give a feminist outlook to them. And then to take it to every other aspect, such as cultural policies. We realized things which I don't think people could imagine, which is that the cultural program in our city was definitely not gender balanced. There was a great gender imbalance. The juries of the prizes that city awards were also not gender balanced at all. And so that cross-sectionality from the gender perspective, from the feminist perspective, we've taken to every aspect of city planning. And we still have a long way to go, but I'm proud because I think we've made great progress throughout these years. On top of these priorities within the Barcelona City Hall, because we have to transform the institution if we want to set an example to transform the city and then the planet as a whole, we're also driving policies in partnership with many associations, women's association, feminist associations in the Barcelona city, for example, against the feminization of poverty, because we are within a social and economic crisis, which we know isn't affecting everyone the same way. So we need strategic strategies to fight this, and also to put care in the center, because I believe that's one of the most strategic policies that we have to drive as cities, and which is one of the teachings which I think are more useful in feminism, not just for women, I insist, also for men, which is to put care in the center. We all need to be looked after and taken care of. We need to be looked after when we're children. We need to be taken care of when we're old. And when we get sick, when our parents get old, and they also need to be taken care of. So care and taking care of is the most important thing in life. I mean, however, care has been rendered invisible. Often it's not paid, and they often fall on the shoulders of women. In Barcelona, for example, we have an institutional public center called Barcelona Cuida, Barcelona Takes Care, to launch the message that but care needs to become a central axis of life in the city, that this kind of work needs to be acknowledged, and also to take care of the people who take care. Because usually the people taking care is the recipient of very little care. So these are just a few examples, but basically what I want to say is there's a lot of things happening and being done in the cities, often without many resources, but that are really inspiring. And I really agree with what Mayor Garcetti said, that cities are these great innovation labs that can inspire and drive great innovation. Oh, it is a pleasure to me to give the floor to the mayor of Freetown, Yvonne Akisoya.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Colleague mayors, thank you so much, Mayor Garcetti, for hosting us, for chairing this. And it is a delight to be here. And as Mayor Kulau, I am also the first elected mayor, female mayor in my city. But we had two previous mayors, one in the 60s and one in the 80s, who were appointed. But that was 40 years ago. So for the little girls watching me on television or seeing me walk along the street, the reaction is very similar. I want to be the mayor. And that's an inspiration. We're talking today about gender disparity. And gender disparity is just one of many disparities. Let's step back for a moment and recognize that there's global disparity. And in the context of being a woman in a country which is already suffering from being underdeveloped or developing, that level of disparity is accentuated. And I think it's an important point to make. It's an important point to make, not because it's what's going on in other parts of the world is any less challenging, but because perhaps the hurdles for overcoming the gender disparity in the global South is complicated by the restricted access to resources nationally, locally, and at the individual level. The approach that we've taken as a city, and I've been very fortunate, I didn't plan this, but I've ended up with a council which is almost 50% female. And that's definitely a plus. It's the first time it's happened. I think, the sun was shining in my direction when I was being voted in and alongside them. So it's been great to have that female support, but it's also been interesting because it sheds a light as well on expectations of women in leadership, expectations of women in office. And one of the things that I think is going to be very fascinating as we work through these policies at city level, these policies collectively, is also our own expectations as women of what women deserve. Transform Freetown is our 3-year agenda for the city's transformation, and we've put women's issues right at the heart of it. We have 4 clusters: resilience, human development, healthy city, and urban mobility. And in human development in particular, we do everything through lens, women and girls. What does it mean when you talk about education, skills development, persons with disability, job creation? Women and girls drive we ensure we are disproportionately favoring actions which will help women and girls. And we do this knowing that even in other sectors, such as urban planning and development, such as health, that again, the targets we've set ourselves as a city are targets which are going to help women. So in health, for example, we have sadly the highest maternal mortality rate in the world in Sierra Leone. And 30% of those deaths happen in our city. And 28% of the deaths happen with teenage girls. So it's actually very important as we tackle the question of gender that we're looking at the underlying causes and consequences, whether it's the fact that lack of access to water makes girls vulnerable, because we talk about caregivers, but they're also the homemakers. From a very young age, the expectation is if there's water to be brought to the family house, that the girls will go out and get it, putting them in a place of vulnerability and increasing the likelihood that they'll be caught up in a vicious cycle. So as we work forward, and I really appreciate the point that's been made by my colleague mayors, the local government, city councils are uniquely placed to put to implement policies, to design policies which are speaking to the causes and the consequences of gender inequality. Others have said already, this is a fight which has been around for a very long time. And one might ask, what difference are we going to make now? And maybe the difference is the fact that there are women like myself and Ada who are sitting in city halls for the first time as mayors, as leaders, who are able to push through policies along with wonderful male colleagues such as Eric and Sadiq, push through policies which don't leave this to chance. Policies that recognize the vulnerability, recognize that leaving women out is not only a loss from their perspective, in terms of poor enrollment in school, lack of access to jobs, lack of or vulnerability to job losses, but it's also a loss for the whole of society. Women hold up 50% of the sky. If we're not here doing our bit, everybody loses out. So I'm really thrilled that I'm part of this. And I really look forward with anticipation and expectation of what it is we're going to deliver together under this change program. And it gives me great pleasure to now hand over to my colleague Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Hello and hola everyone. It's great to be able to connect with you all. And I begin by thanking the Mayor of Freetown, Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, for that introduction and for her inspiring words, and also to say hello to two good friends of mine who've already spoken, Eric and Ada, great friends from great cities, Los Angeles and Barcelona. I also want to say what an honor it is for London to be involved in the launch of this new and groundbreaking network. Thousands of miles and whole oceans separate our different cities, but it's truly inspiring to see how united we are in our commitment to gender equity and furthering the causes of all women's rights, regardless of race, religion, ethnic origin, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity or expression. There's no doubt that this pandemic has the potential to undo much of the progress that's been made globally towards gender equality in recent decades. In fact, the IMF has warned that 30 years of gains for women's economic opportunities could be completely wiped out unless urgent action is taken. Such statements are a sobering reminder that while we're all facing the same storm, we're not all in the same boat. Indeed, the reality is that women in London and in cities around the world are being disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and are at risk of falling even further behind than their male counterparts. We simply cannot allow this to happen. And that's why I'm proud that London is joining forces with all of you as a co-founder of the Change Network to make sure we avert this scenario and continue our momentum in the direction of gender equality. Gender equality has to be more than an aspiration. It has to be a fundamental human right, and one that we never, ever compromise on. And as a former human rights lawyer, as a progressive, and as a proud feminist and ally, I firmly believe it should be a lived reality, not an abstract ideal. And not only is its pursuit morally right, we know that our societies are far stronger, our economies much more productive, and our businesses way more profitable when women can access the opportunities they need to fulfill their potential. So I look forward to working with all of you to accomplish our common goals in this area. Guided by our shared values, I'm confident that this new network can make a real and lasting difference, not only in helping to protect women from the fallout of this pandemic, but also in empowering them in all their diversity and achieving the systemic change we all want to see and know is possible. It's a privilege now for me to introduce Dr. Claudia Scheinbaum Pardo, the Chief of Government of Mexico City.
Muchas gracias. Gracias a Eric Garcetti.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric Garcetti, Mayor of Los Angeles, and all our colleagues who are in this conference. I'm going to read a statement that I prepared, and which also frame the actions we've taken, particularly for the past year in the city of Mexico, where we declared a gendered violence alert with a series of specific actions. Violence towards women is a product of many years of deep normalized inequality, a culture that invisibilizes women, reduces women to an object, and denies her the dignity of a person with rights. Among us, those who are most exposed are those who have the least. Therefore, to eradicate gendered violence, to necessarily build a city of rights and the sustained equality of women, it's a goal of the government that I represent within a framework of justice and dignity for all. Within this framework, a year ago in Mexico City, we made the decision of decree an alert for gendered violence in Mexico City, especially because of the number of feminicides in the city. This decision comes from the demand that it be done so from various women's groups that mobilized around Mexico City. Our obligation of giving account of what we do. Yesterday, we presented our report of the previous year where the alert has proclaimed, and I would like to mention some of the actions that we've taken in the city. Different acts and laws that affect the city of Mexico especially, which works as its own state, in fact. In the City Congress, an initiative for a public registry of sexual offenders, approval of a law punishing digital violence. Right now, we've downloaded all the contents from social network from the moment when a woman makes a report of about digital violence. We also have the law of genetic samples for cases of sexual violence. The Justice Department is forced to inform to all the public ministries. A law has been passed where it is the offender who has to leave the conjugal home. So we are not strengthening the need for women's shelters, but we are strengthening the woman's right to remain in her home. We're also strengthening the 32 territorial units around the city that for women's needs, with which we've seen 51,000 women, and in 257 cases, we've reduced the right of a woman being murdered. We've also created a special unit in the Mexico City Police to stop harassment and violence against female police. 200 pathways for women safe with lighting and panic buttons to reduce sexual violence in the public space, which is down 45% since these paths were constructed. We've also strengthened actions like Let's Travel Safe and Free in the city's public transport system. And we have improved several public spaces in the city, which in the Justice Department have a special area for women who've been sexually assaulted. We also have 2 phone lines for women who are at risk, at urgent risk, as well as a network of 100 female lawyers for gendered violence cases who offer legal counseling to women across the city of Mexico. We also have a special program called Pillars, promoting education, culture, sports, where 60% of which are women, and 65% of all the microloans we've awarded in the city, especially those related with the pandemic, are directly related to supporting women. Our country, our city in particular, has got a very long-standing culture of sexism. But me as a head of government, as a female head of government, we are responsible and we are behooved to particularly look at everything having to do with gendered violence in the city of Mexico. So we're very happy to be sharing all of these practices and experiences with different cities across the world. Thank you very much. And now I would like to present the video from the governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike.
Hello, I'm Koike Yuriko, governor of Tokyo. Tokyo is very pleased to be one of the founding cities of change, and I am delighted to be a part of today's launch event. Due to the time difference, unfortunately, I'm joining you by video message. I regret not being able to speak with other participating mayors. However, I hope that we take this opportunity to further deepen the friendship between our cities. As leaders, we work to resolve issues faced by our own city. At the same time, we also seek to collaborate with other cities. And I believe such collaborations not only contribute to advancing our cities, but also to resolving global challenges. Since taking office as Tokyo's first female governor in 2016, I have focused on women's empowerment. I'm the first female governor of Tokyo, but I won't be the last. And I look forward to taking on the enormous challenge of gender equality with all of you.
Wow, we've heard about a lot of initiatives already underway. Fantastic. Thank you. Now I'm going to go to one of the groundbreaking women on this call today, Yvonne. I'm going to ask you first, because you're already, you're doing such a lot, it sounds, in Freetown. But why for you is now the most important time to launch change?
Thank you. So we're in the middle of a pandemic. We are also still in the middle of a climate crisis, in case anybody had forgotten about that. And I think that these are two areas which really demonstrate the extent to which women are impacted and the extent to which women are the solution. And at a time when we're talking all around the world about a reset, and in C40 cities, which Mayor Garcetti has already made mention of, we as mayors have come together in a task force, and we are promoting what's being known as a green and just recovery. Well, the just element of that also includes gender parity. And as I mentioned, the pandemic, as many people have said already, the pandemic has shown the vulnerability of women, but it's also shown their resourcefulness in responding. So now is an important time because there is an opportunity for us to look at how do we do life post-COVID or as we come out of COVID. And launching change now means that we have the ears of many people. And it's an opportunity to ensure that we're building in these ideas, these policies, this focus on gender parity into the solutions for reducing the chances of another pandemic, and also into the solutions for climate as we go into this recovery. At the City Council, as a C40 Cities member, we have a Women for Climate group. We were part of Women for Climate, and we're doing work with young women to promote their ideas for the solution. From the pandemic perspective, one of the things which has been so exciting has been to see ordinary people step forward during the pandemic with solutions. Whether it was the young woman who came to my office and said she was part of a group of women, they've called themselves 100 for 100, 100 women feeding 100 families, or it was the young girl who was 8 years old and had sewn face masks, and came to give them for community members, particularly for traders. So the timing, I think, is right, because the world is looking at these two issues where we as women have already played a disproportionate part and continue to do so Unfortunately, as victims of climate change, particularly in the areas of the world where we're already seeing the impact of devastating weather conditions. I say of this part of the world, but I'm talking to Mayor Garcetti, who's seen fires which are unimaginable right there in California. Women have been at the brunt of these. Women can be the solution, can be a real significant part of the solution. So the timing is now.
Thank you, Yvonne. And Eric, you're going to be leading this whole initiative for the at least first 3 years. So why for you is now the most important time to do this?
Well, I think all of the mayors and governors and chiefs of government have laid it out beautifully, that this is a moment in which, something like a crisis lays out the inequality and compounds the inequality that we have before. And we're not going to wait 2.5 centuries to erase these gaps. We can actually take huge, bold steps. And one of the ways that we did that in Los Angeles was just by measuring this. We commissioned a study, and we recommission it every few years, on the state of girls and women in Los Angeles. Mount St. Mary's is our academic partner in this, but we picked 5 areas to measure what we were missing. I always ask mayors, do you know what percentage of the youth sports in your city facilities are girls versus boys? Sometimes I'll ask them, do you know how many of the department heads you've appointed are women versus men? Do you track these things? Do you measure them? And sometimes we didn't know what we didn't know. And so it's very helpful to us as leaders of our cities to find that information out and to know that, so that we can make those changes. Like I said, we had a wage gap in the mayor's office among our own employees between men and women that we were able to erase once we measured it. We were able to change those youth sports, change those commissioner leaderships, appoint women into department heads, and so much more. From looking at domestic violence, where literally women were being turned away from services because we hadn't funded them. We are funding more per night for our animals in our animal shelters than for women and their children in domestic violence shelters. So once you begin to open this up, it shouldn't be something that scares you. It should be something that excites you to change it, because once you know, you can't go backwards. And at this moment in this crisis, I think we all feel that this is an opportunity to leapfrog, not to slow walk progress.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Now, we know that this crisis is affecting the whole world. But Sadiq, what about your city? What about London? How has COVID-19 affected the women or the lives of women in London?
One of the things, Inga, I think mayors have to do is, with humility and in a sober way, look at what's happening in their city. One of the things that I'm afraid I've got to share with colleagues around the world is, in London, we've seen women suffer disproportionately more in terms of economic impacts, social impacts, and psychological impacts than men. We've seen women having their careers disrupted more than men because they have more childcare responsibilities, and also because of homeschooling has affected women more than men. We've also seen, I'm afraid, Inga, that mothers were almost 50% more likely to have lost or resigned from their job than fathers. So what we've seen is, in a number of areas, violence against women and girls, a huge spike in relation to women having to stay at home during restrictions. So it's been bad for women in our city and girls in our city. Another stat, Inga, is 8 out of 10 people in low-paid jobs are women. And so we from City Hall have been far more nimble in responding to this disproportionality than the government. So we've done a number of things to address these anomalies. From City Hall, we've invested millions of pounds in relation to supporting women who are the victims of violence. Eric talked about his experience in LA. We noticed there weren't, for example, places for survivors and victims to go to. Massively increased refugees and other supports for women who are the victims or survivors of domestic abuse, domestic violence. We've also increased resources to the police when it comes to this area. Another big issue is actually voluntary and community groups can reach women far quicker than the state. So we've invested in the voluntary and community group, including providing food for women. The other two big game changers, Inga, is we've invested millions of pounds from our adult education budget. We've got a £300 million adult education budget to reskilling, upskilling women so they can get better, higher paid jobs going forward. And the final thing, Inga, relevant to help we can give now is making sure women have good advice in relation to their employment rights. It's really important they receive good advice going forward. And so we're trying to do our bit, because my concern is this assumption we make, and Eric talked about this, is this sense of urgency to make progress. My worry is not the lack of progress, but we're going backwards. And that's why this initiative that we've launched today with great mayors around the world, men and women, is so important.
Thanks, Sadiq. Now, Barcelona, Ada, have you got a view on how your COVID-19 has affected women in your city?
Gracias. Pues muy en la línea.
Very much, we are very much aligned with what my friend Sadiq has said. The crisis always shows the crisis that existed before this one. There was an inequality crisis, there was a climate emergency crisis, and with the pandemic, all of this has become even more evident. To be specific, with regards to the gender issue, clearly, when there is a crisis, women are always the most affected ones. And I'd like to highlight a couple of issues. First, male chauvinistic violence that we have had during the lockdown months as a protection measure to avoid contagion. Well, inside homes, well, for women who are harassed women and battered women who suffer from male violence, it becomes hell. So the place that should be the most secure one during the pandemic, it becomes the most insecure place for them. And well, and that violence was exerted without anybody knowing about it. So we have had to accompany women victims of violence, not only women. Allow me to mention as well girls and boys, because we also know that there has been an increase, a very worrisome increase of sexual violence and sexual abuse against boys and girls. So once the lockdown is over, we intensified the strategies to get in touch with these women who are victims and children who are victims through the hotline, and by developing strategies so that they do not feel alone and so that they could access help. Another aspect during this crisis, which was also mentioned by Sadiq, is the work issue. The inequality that already exists in the labor market, it has become even more visible. All of the progresses, small steps forward that we take, it all of a sudden gets lost during the pandemic, and women are the ones who have to cover the carrying needs. So this has been shown in many aspects. The most important jobs during the crisis are carried by women in the health front, in the care of the elderly, who are the most vulnerable people during the pandemic, caregiving at home, selling food at the at the height of the lockdown. A lot of women were selling food in the supermarkets for everybody to eat. So these are jobs that are normally the most precarious ones, and the worst paid ones, and the ones that have the least security. They are all carried out by women. When we have had to have children at home for online schooling, well, who takes care of them? Women again. And also the care of these boys and girls not going to school. And unfortunately, in some cases, they have left their jobs to be able to take care of these boys and girls. And as I've said beforehand, we have gone back. We have lost what we had already accomplished. We should never forget that when we talk about discrimination against women, it is crucial, especially women who have a job like being mayors, and those of us who have greater visibility. In the same way, we say that the crisis has affected more women than men. The crisis has not affected all women equally. We have to remember that our social class differences, and therefore this has affected more disproportionately poor women, migrant women, because in which there is more abuse, and because they carry out the hardest jobs, and with laws that do not allow us to cover the most basic rights of migrant women. And we have to remember LGBTI women too, especially trans women, who suffer special discrimination and violence in all fields. I am fully convinced that there can't be a feminist struggle without our trans sisters. And therefore, I want to spend the gaze of the feminist gazes. There are women who suffer double and triple discrimination, double and triple violence.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think one of the things that I heard, particularly from you, Sadiq, was about the agility you have within a city versus if you think about a whole, sort of government system of a whole country. So now we will go to we'll hear about some successful programs and policies that have actually been launched in some of the cities, and really to learn a little bit about what the keys to the success were. So Claudia, in Mexico City, you did previously talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done, but perhaps you can highlight a successful program and really what was the key to that success?
Sí, quizá podríamos hablar, podría hablar yo de...
Maybe I could talk about 3 significant programs for women in the city. The first one is related to the care we are giving with regards to violence against women in different areas. Specifically, one program we carried out, which we called Women Who Are Lawyers for Women. 100 women in different timetables who can actually take care of any woman who denounces physical, sexual violence in the public administration. Normally, public ministries do not have a gender-based vision, and women will always have a woman who is a lawyer coaching them in their denouncing, so that not only we have had different cases in which they have got justice, but women are encouraged to denounce what they would not denounce before this program exists. It is a program that has been in force for 1.5 years now, and it has been very important in terms of reducing violence. And the other 2 programs that are related to the support of financial independence of women is a program that we call Pillars, Point of Innovation, Freedom of Knowledge, 260 public spaces that are not fully open due to the pandemic, in which we provide education, sports, cultural activities in the poorest areas, in the poorest district of the city. Young women are the ones who have had the greatest access to these pillars. They access it for free, so that a woman who became pregnant while she was a teenager and who dropped out of school, she can end her school with full tutorial support, and thus having a second chance in her life. And finally, what we have increased during the pandemic is the financial support through microcredit, microloans for the development of women's financial independence, with a specific amount in which we have given 50,000 financial supports, and 65% of them are directly addressed to women. So these are 3 programs that I believe are crucial within this generic framework. And secondly, I'd like to say that parity in city is by law. In the case of the City Council of Mexico City, and in the case of candidates to the 16 districts to the city, and in the case of our city government, half of our government needs to be women by law.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, Eric, what about you? I know you mentioned a little bit of a focus on not only women, but really starting down at a very young age of girls. But can you share with us anything else that's been a real success for you?
Sure. I'll just give you one because I know time is tight. Firefighters. We often think of a firefighter in our mind as a man. There's girls who, for my daughter growing up, she's been obsessed with firefighters and wanted to be a firefighter, and yet there's been very few avenues for female firefighters. So we started very intentionally early on to look at ways we could make firehouses more welcoming to women, recruit more women, and plant the seed with more girls, the idea of becoming firefighters. So we started a girls' fire camp in the summertime where they get to play at being a firefighter and learn some of the skills, start getting ready for the work that they'll need to do if they want to become a firefighter. We are intentionally recruiting from great female athletes and in colleges and from the military and places where we've always recruited great men to get great women. And now we have 123 female firefighters, which is the most we've ever had in our city's history. Now, we've still got a long way to go, and we've doubled the number. We had our first graduating class that had a woman who won the overall best cadet in the entire class that was a woman. But you have to have these pipelines. You can't wait for the pipeline to produce the results. You have to re-engineer the pipelines yourself. And I think that's the lesson, whether it's sports, whether it's looking at what we do in terms of our business programs, or whether it's something like our firefighters, a way that you can be intentional with actions and inspire cities around the world to learn from those lessons as you copy from them their best practices too.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned earlier about how important it is that it's got to cover everything in all areas. So over to you, Sadiq. How have you embedded gender issues across all areas of your work?
Well, firstly, just something that Ada and Eric and Yvonne and Claudia touched upon is the great thing about this network is it's big C collaboration, small c competition. So when I see colleagues in Barcelona or Freetown doing stuff, I want to copy it, and because I want to be better than them in relation to gender equity. So one of the first things I did is just make sure my team knows that I want gender equity hardwired into everything we do. Not simply childcare, important though it is, but from housing to our hiring policies, recruitment, retention, progression, from policing to environment. It's really important. One of the first things I discovered when I became mayor is we didn't know whether there was a gender pay gap because nobody had measured the pay of women versus the pay of men. So we did that and realized the higher up you went, the more male the organization began. So we've gone from having a big gender pay gap to us now being, the gender pay gap is zero. Which is really important. Also, Inga, we've tried to make sure that we address the sort of issues that have an impact on ambition and aspiration. So, for example, an amazing stat, many of you have been to Parliament Square. There are 11 statues of 11 great people. How many of those 11 great people in Parliament Square are statues of women? Answer, zero before I became mayor. Because of a great campaign led by women, we now have our first woman statue, Millicent Fawcett, in Parliament Square. We've also, Inga, said, you know what, certain adverts in a public space are not only sexist, they engender unrealistic images of women that really can have an impact, particularly on girls. So they are now outlawed on our transport networks. We've made sure that we, in our public realm, think about whether they represent our society in terms of women, but also ethnicity, in terms of people who are disabled and the like. So there's a commission set up to look into the public realm. The other key thing we've got to do, Inga, and you know this from the industry you work in, is address stereotypes. So we've invested a lot of money, effort into the STEM subjects, the science subjects, the tech subjects, the engineering subjects, the math subjects. I want girls with a huge amount of potential to have their potential fulfilled by us giving a helping hand. So we're doing a lot, Inga, and it's really important, though, that we as friends across the world collaborate. And so one of the great things about this conversation's been is hearing about the wonderful things happening in Barcelona or in Mexico City or in Los Angeles or in Freetown. We're collaborating, but also in a fraternal way, competing as well to make sure which of our cities can be the most girl-friendly and the most women-friendly.
Yeah, that's it. And get them young, get to them young. Yeah, that's great. Yvonne, what about in Freetown? How are you embedding it?
Great. So we've got a big informal sector in terms of the economy, a lot of traders, and 90% of the people who trade are women, trading in the markets, which made them vulnerable during the lockdown, vulnerable during COVID. But what we've done has been to engage them, to hear from them. Many of these women are not educated or maybe educated just to a small degree, maybe middle school. And we have introduced adult literacy programs, digital adult literacy programs. So it's something you can do on your phone, which means you're not having to leave the market. As there's a pilot going on with that. At the same time, my absolutely favorite intervention with the market women has been the start of our rollout of the FCC Adventure Learning Nursery Centers. When I was campaigning, I saw that many of these women had to bring their children, their little ones under 5, to the market with them. And they'd just be sat at their feet, playing under their tables, completely not usefully engaged. We, a month ago, launched the first of our market nurseries. So the market women's children are actually getting the best education, because we're doing it in partnership with the best preschool giver in the city. And this is one, and we've got another one rolled out, and the plan is to have a chain of these free of charge. And really excited to see the gender. It's 40 places, 18 were girls, 22 were boys. So we're really, really pleased. And we're going to see more of that going on. But moving on beyond that, in the school level, the city has a seat on the school boards. We're changing all of the memberships and making sure each board seat for the city is a woman. And then moving on to that question of maternal mortality, a big part of that is the fact that we don't have gynecologists. We don't have many trained specialist gynecologists, obs and gynes. And we're really excited. And this is, again, where the power of cities can come in. It's not our mandate to run the medical school, but as a city, we were able to work with a foundation and raise the money, which means that next year, we're going to start the first ever program for getting doctors specializing as gynecologists. And that will directly impact maternal mortality in our city. So whether it's, building more markets with better conditions, so these women for whom this is their life can work in better conditions, or it's actually making sure each of those markets has not just a nursery, but a health corner where throughout everything we're doing, thinking of our women and looking at how to better position them for the future.
Thank you, Yvonne. Now, I know you're all very, very busy people, so we will have to end now. Many more things I would have loved to have asked you all. I really would. And hopefully we can do something like this again and hear about the progress of the Change programme. So thank you all for giving up so much of your time today. We really all appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for viewing it. And let's get some support together and get this collaboration going. Fantastic. Thank you all very much.